last decade has sparked a real change in society, especially for women. With the introduction of social media, women have been able to connect in different settings, and especially social media offers them this space. Sexual abuse and violence against women has grown dramatically in the last decade. Last year, a record number of rapes were reported. 63,000 women reported being raped in the UK. But the scary thing is that only 1 in 100 rapes were actually prosecuted. So in a sense, only 1 in 100 rapes were actually accounted for and someone was made accountable for their actions. After such a high amount of rapes being reported, surely women might feel like there's no point reporting rapes if no one's actually getting charged for it. This accountability is something that I'm going to focus on in this documentary. Holding men accountable for their actions is something that we in society struggle to do so. There's many examples in society where men have not been accountable for their actions, and I think social media has allowed for many men to become accountable for their actions, with the Me Too movement striking massive change in the way that women communicate, and also allowing women a space to open up about stories that have happened to them and events that have happened to them. This documentary will follow 3 of my friends. I'm a 22-year-old woman who lives in southeast London, and I have 3 friends who have actually been willing to talk about their experiences, whether that be of sexual assault or their own experiences to indecent behaviour by men. This is something that is so topical, and my friends who are 22 have experienced it already at such a young age. And it's really showing how social media can really influence how they feel about their stories. So to start with, I asked my friends how they feel as a woman in society.
Well, I think it's quite challenging.
I mean, it's a difficult one to answer. That's quite a big question that I could really go into a lot.
I think society is kind of not as set up for women as it is for men. It's kind of set up to reward men and pit women against each other rather than celebrate us as a whole.
I think especially with the media, I think it can be very all-consuming. We're constantly on our phones, we're constantly getting news stories, especially things about women and about gender-based violence and things like that.
How much pressure is put upon us
Definitely.
in relation to the way we look. Especially with social media, I grew up when that was becoming a thing. I felt constantly the need to compare myself to other women. And these idolised, body types or appearances that were just not attainable.
I think it's very difficult for women to feel safe in today's society. I think there's a lot of pressure put on us. I think there's a lot of fear that's kind of surrounding us as women, kind of from the media.
Where boys were looking at these images as well, it was women subconsciously felt the need to compete with these idolised women to, I don't know, I guess gain validation, which is sad to admit.
I think women struggle with not only versing men but versing each other.
But yeah, the media's just played a massive impact in the sense of how women are viewed and how they view themselves, and also how they're consumed. Which I think is the sadder part.
And I think it can be very scary to be a woman, especially today.
Has there ever been an event that's happened to you that's affected the way that you feel as a woman in society?
Well, it's hard to kind of pinpoint one. I've never had anything that's horrific, but I also think there are so many things that happen regularly that kind of just add up, and also that we're just so desensitized to as women because they happen all the time. On more than one occasion, I've had a man show their cock to me on the tube and get it all out on a very busy rush hour tube carriage, and everyone else in the carriage just kind of looked away, and they turned away, and they left this kind of drunk man showing his cock to me and standing right in front of me and leering to me and trying to suggest things, and it was weird because it was a very full carriage and kind of everybody did nothing, and you wouldn't really think that or see that as sexual harassment, but it is. And when I called transport police afterwards, and they said, oh, we have him on record, he's done this before, we can do this, and they were we can take him to court for a couple of charges, but you have to come and apply it. And it was even though they have the video footage and they have my statement, it still isn't enough to like basically get him put away or done any kind of rap on his hand, any kind of reprimand.
Mhm.
I think, I mean, I've also had like people following me home. I've had kind of a bus driver the other day stopped a guy from getting off at the same stop as me because we were the only two people on the bus, and he randomly decided to get up as soon as he saw that I was getting off, and she thought that was suspicious and that it wasn't going to be his stop. So I'm really grateful that she stopped him from that happening.
I think there's been quite a few, but I think that I'm kind of in the majority. I think basically every woman I've spoken to about kind of fears of being a woman can say the same as what I'm about to say. But I mean, just like walking around and feeling like you're being followed, and then you kind of realise that you are being followed, or men on the train, catcalling. I've been catcalled since I was about 10 years old. I remember walking home from like through a park when I was about 10 or 11 from primary school, being shouted at by a man like in a van, typical. But it's just crazy to think that children are being targeted, and then you think once you get older and you start to kind of develop and look a bit more womanly, I mean, obviously it doesn't really matter about how you look. I think that the people that catcall and like assault women and things like that, I don't think that they even take into consideration the way that you look. But from my experience, as I grew up and kind of like developed, that was when I got the worst kind of experiences. I mean, I've spoken with a lot of people, but there's just a lot of horrible things that happen to women. I think like just as a woman, you want to enjoy yourself and you want to let go and feel free, but you're always constantly looking behind you to see who's there kind of lurking in the shadows. And I mean, yeah, it doesn't feel very safe. I think, yeah, I mean, when I was at a festival, that was probably like the turning point when I was kind of exposed to the worst that I had been exposed to at that point. And I was just dancing to the Macarena and some man tried to like assault me. And I think that's what I mean about you could be anywhere in your life, you could be doing anything, you could be making a fool out of yourself and having the best time, and one small thing like a man touching you inappropriately or talking to you inappropriately or looking at you funny can just ruin that whole experience. Like, I don't think I'd ever go back to a festival after that experience.
Yeah, so there was one event in particular that does stand out to me that happened when I was turning 17.
Mhm.
I was out in London with a friend, you know, it was my birthday, I was really excited, got dressed up, and obviously I shouldn't have been out drinking at that age, but it's not completely uncommon.
Everyone did it.
Yeah, it wasn't completely uncommon, and I was almost of age. And then I got stopped in a street by a promoter for a club in Mayfair, and obviously I jumped at the chance to go to that. You know, if someone tells you you're going to have free drinks all night, you're going to go
Why
for
not?
it. But yeah, obviously it didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped, so I got into this club. I mean, the promoter was like very friendly, but he kind of left us at a table with some drinks, and it was just me and my friend, so we felt fine about that. But yeah, so we were being given drinks at this table, and I am 100% sure I only had no more than 2 drinks that night. And I know that I was taken advantage of by some older men who were not from the UK, but clearly had a lot of money to be spending in this club. What was sad is I know that I was literally like, I was so weak, you could have just let go of me and I would have dropped to the floor, but these men were trying to do things with me. And I think it got to a point where one of the guys, thankfully, he was just like, you're not okay. I can't really remember it, but I know that I was being somewhat rejected at this point. That's all I remember. And at that point, I'm pretty sure I got carried out the club and left on the floor
Yeah.
outside the club. so like no one was like trying to help me. I was kind of seen as like, but literally chucked me on the street, and I didn't know what was going on at the time at all. Like I can't really tell you anything about that. Thankfully my friend hadn't been spiked, and she was able to look out for me. Like God forbid what would have happened if we'd both been spiked. But I know that she had a lot of trouble getting me home. Like I kept like collapsing and like falling on the floor. I know that we ended up booking a cab home, but I don't think there were any trains, and I know that when the cab arrived, apparently they couldn't wake me up. Like I couldn't actually get out the cab.
So scary.
Yeah, and when I walked into my house, I obviously was in no condition to think about keys or anything. I think I just like flimsily like banged at the door.
Yeah.
And my parents said that I literally looked dead. Like they couldn't see a person there.
Yeah.
But I just went straight to bed, and I woke up and I didn't know who I was. And I'd never had that feeling before. I genuinely woke up and I had no idea who I was, what I'd been up to in the last however many hours, how I got to where I was. It was so scary, but at the same time, the effects of the drug kind of took away any emotional attachment I could have had to the event. So I think that I just felt a lot of shame for it having happened to me, and I blamed myself a lot because I thought, this is my fault, I shouldn't have been
But that's what society does, is it makes women out to be, oh, she was too drunk, that's why someone took advantage of her, or she was wearing something too revealing, that's why someone took advantage of her. It's like always giving excuses for men.
But in reality, I was vulnerable in that situation, and any decent person should have looked out for
and
me.
recognised that.
And obviously the event shouldn't have happened in the first place. I shouldn't have been spiked.
Have you interacted with society and like men in society you see on the streets differently?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always super careful.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I always carry my keys in between my fingers when I'm walking around on my own.
Getting the keys out, making sure you have them in your hand. Like, anytime I'm standing outside my door and you like drop your keys, there's like a lurch of your heart because you're like, what's happening? Oh my god, this could be anything.
I'd say that I definitely felt a lot more at risk when going out. I became a lot less trusting of people.
I mean, you just take... I think that there's a lot of things that you're told to do as a woman to make yourself feel safe.
I mean, it's interesting because I know, I mean, especially as a Londoner, I think it's different because a lot of my friends who kind of live in different areas would feel horrified if they knew that like I go out walking in the dark. I will wear my AirPods sometimes when I feel like I'm safe. When I'm in my own town, I kind of feel like I know the surroundings, but even then you're still kind of like, every time I put them in, I'm like, should I be doing this? Like, is this okay? Which is kind of what you think should be crazy to think about, like, why is it not okay for me to wear my headphones?
I suppose I don't feel that trusting towards like strangers who are male specifically.
There's a lot of things that you have to do now as a woman, or you're told to do in order to keep yourself safe, and I don't think that the pressure should be put on women.
It's crazy how social media has allowed women to start forming a community, a safe space. Women have gone to TikTok, to Instagram, to share their stories about male inappropriate behaviour. Women share videos, pictures of men acting inappropriately, and this has become a safe space for women to actually talk about their issues. Whereas before social media, where did women go to talk about these things? Often they weren't even believed about these stories. The next question I wanted to ask the girls was if they see social media as a place, a safe space to tell their story, and whether it can be used in a positive way.
Yeah, I think social media has definitely become a much better place for like speaking out, especially things that like you wouldn't feel comfortable maybe telling your parents or telling like the police straight away, and definitely it's so much easier to share things, and there's kind of even a level of being anonymous to it.
I mean, I think it's a really good place to start, but from my experience, stories are being told, and it kind of highlights the amount of women that it happens to on a daily basis, and I think that kind of makes me feel less safe.
like it could, but part of me feels like social media is it's so saturated just with information in general that I don't know if it would be the right platform to get the right kind of attention that this topic would need.
But also I think that sometimes like, as much as social media is great for like speaking out and everyone's speaking out,
Social media is somewhere it's very come and go with information. Like, everything is so instantly accessible that people will forget about it after 2 seconds, or they won't have the patience to read or find out more about a certain thing, because you'll be stimulated by something else popping up on your screen.
Although, like, I think it's very empowering for women to share their stories and for other women to kind of like rally up together, I think it does kind of instill fear in you that kind of it just happens to everyone and no one is safe, really.
like, it's great, we're creating this community, but there's not much action being taken from it.
Social media, where it is something that's used more leisurely and tends to take up little of our attention, I don't know if I think it's the most suitable place.
Like, you have all these TikToks where people share around like, oh, this guy did this to me and this guy did this to me, and sometimes there can be that like online doxing thing where like Instagrams get leaked and things, and it becomes like a dangerous world for them online, but there isn't that many repercussions in the kind of real world.
You're just, as a woman that shares their story to the government and to everyone, kind of like the world and the media, you're just a statistic.
So yeah, I don't think it's the best platform for it, but I completely understand why people have started to take it into their own hands to use their platforms to voice these things, because obviously that is a way of getting your story out to a larger audience, which I think is good.
The next question I wanted to pose to the girls was how they felt about the Me Too movement, whether they thought that this was a helpful situation for them, and maybe perhaps whether it changed the way they feel about their event. It's crazy how this Me Too movement revolution has grown. This movement started in 2006 on MySpace and now is being able to arrest and prosecute men like Harvey Weinstein. This movement has such power and has such possibilities to actually get these women an answer, and also be able to hold men accountable for their actions, because a lot of the time men aren't held accountable for their actions.
I think the Me Too movement was a really important thing to have happened and to come about.
I think people are a lot more aware of things that happen, and especially with Me Too, like things that happen in big institutions, in the media, in places that kind of got away with the violence against women and sexual harassment.
I think it's weird because if we didn't feel safe before, we maybe don't feel we feel even less safe now.
You see your favourite actors or people, these big names in Hollywood, and you see all these horrible things that they've done to people.
I think so many women obviously came out with a lot of stories that wouldn't have been known, wouldn't have been voiced if it wasn't for the Me Too movement. And I think a lot of people started to become aware of how common these things that were happening actually are.
And then you kind of have this sense of, am I allowed to watch this? Am I allowed to do this? Because of the Me Too movement, and you're like, I'm still supporting women, I'm still supporting myself.
There's this fear that's just obviously affecting women, whether we like it or not, like it's in the back of our minds from these experiences.
I also think those movements have been like a breeding ground for men and also women to kind of judge women and put the blame on them, and there's a lot of victim blaming that happens.
There's a lot of kind of contradictions with it, and kind of not knowing how to navigate that space.
People making excuses for what they've done, or saying, well, that woman was dressed like this, or that woman was asking for it. And I think that that's a very disgusting thing that's come out of the Me Too movement.
But also, it seems unfair for us now to go into every circumstance seeing men as something to blame.
Yeah.
Not every man in your life is going to do this to you.
Yeah.
The next question I wanted to ask the girls was whether they felt like society could actually hear them. That's when they're talking about their reports and the stories that have happened to the girls. It's important to trust society, to make sure men are responsible for their actions. So I asked the girls, do they trust society to hold these men accountable?
No, I don't think I do.
No, I can't say that I do.
Honestly, no.
I feel like there's a lot of fear in admitting that there are a lot of things that happen that are maybe covert, that aren't okay.
I think this is a systemic problem.
I can't put a point on any instance where a man has been held accountable in the way that I think would be just.
And I think that if society were to shine a light on these situations, you know, there would be a lot flagged up. You know, the stuff that we're talking about isn't uncommon.
And I think especially big old institutions like universities, they are so interested in money and keeping and saving face that they will do anything to avoid a scandal. And even if that means not holding all the right people accountable.
I feel like it needs to be down to the individual to take accountability for what they've done. I don't think that society can ridicule someone into becoming a better person. And I think that that's something that's really popular on social media now is, you know, it's easy to be like good, bad, victim, perpetrator, but how helpful is that in the bigger scheme, you know? So...
And you just think like, how are you supposed to put your faith into a government that lets men that assault women, who have records, there's records of men that have assaulted women, and like, for them to just allow them to walk on the streets.
It kind of has to go unspoken about sometimes, which is really sad.
I know so many people at different universities where movements have happened and nothing's kind of come from it. Like, boys often get a rap on the shoulder and be like, oh, that's just boys will be boys. And that is still a big part of what we need to fix as a society.
When are we going to start making these men accountable? And I think that should start with the government, but I don't have any faith in this government.
So I don't trust society to be responsible for making men accountable for their actions.
Big institutions like universities, like the police force, are not contributing their part by kind of diving in deep and figuring out that they're kind of helping these issues.
The last question I wanted to ask my friends was what they felt that society could do to make them feel more safe as a woman. We've covered loads of different points, from social media to the Me Too movement, and also talking about how institutions can engage with these conversations rather than just pushing them aside and ignoring the real issue. So what I wanted to do was really get their personal view into what this question would really mean to them.
I think it's interesting because I think so much of the pressure is kind of put on women.
I'd like to see... It's hard because everything that I go to say, I feel like there's a flip side to it.
I think social media is a very good jumping off point, and I think it's a very good thing to kind of bring awareness to subjects like this, but it is a very much more deep-rooted issue than something that can just be like a quick post saying like #MeToo. I don't think that that's going to make any difference. I think that that brings awareness, and I think people do their best.
Like, you go into a bathroom at the ladies and it's like, oh, if you feel unsafe, do this, do this, do this, and oh, like, you can buy these things that will go over your drink and it will show if you've been spiked, and you can buy this to put in your hair and like hide your keys, and you can do this. And then it's like, there's still a story the other day about someone walking to their house at 12 PM broad daylight, and another guy attacks her as she's walking into her own house.
I feel like I'd like to see women being respected for more than the way they look, and for that to not be of such importance in an age where, you know, everything is just so based on appeal and appearance. And
But I also can't think of things kind of like in that sugar-coated way.
We need to kind of attack it from the male point of view.
I really think that the social media does allow women to kind of rally around together, and I have seen a big like change, especially on my social media feeds, of women supporting women, and I think that's a beautiful thing to see.
And I'm not talking about just physical appearance. I mean, we're so obsessed with how things appear in general, social media, brands, etc.
And I think Sadiq Khan released a video a week or two ago kind of targeting men and their behaviour and how their behaviour is the one that needs to be stopped, because it is. That you can tell women all the different ways they can make themselves feel safer, and that's great, but it's not their behaviour that's the problem.
Like, I'd hope that that would change it forever, but that these men have existed for time, and I don't think that we're ever going to get rid of this inappropriate behaviour, male violence, male sexual assault, things like that.
But I'd like women to be appreciated for their qualities on a deeper level. I think that's something that would make us feel a lot safer.
I mean, I just think that, yeah, it is just so much more of a deep-rooted issue than a hashtag movement.
We need to figure out a way as society to kind of attack this issue head on and kind of make it about the men, and stop telling women, walk with another person, do this, do that, don't walk at night. Why should I not be allowed to walk at night?
After talking to my friends, I think it gave me and them as well a real insight into maybe what needs to change or what could come about in society that might make us feel safer as women. I think we've brought account to social media being something that can be a real starter for conversations like this. Social media can be sparks of communities, it sparks hashtag movements like the Me Too movement, which had incredible, powerful results. But also, social media isn't the be-all and end-all of this conversation. This conversation is going to go on for years, and I think it's important that women take into account that talking to each other can help. Talking to each other and friends, like I found talking to my friends, it gave such an insight into this conversation that maybe I've not had before, and whether we had the same views on things or different views, or they offered something that was new and I actually agreed with and I'd never thought about before. Having conversations with each other as women is so important, and I really think that that's the first place to start, is having conversations with each other.